Okay, so we are live now and it's almost 6 o'clock. So welcome to this evening session or this week session on Mary, Our Lady. And perhaps it would be good as we start off, since Patricia doesn't need any introduction, she's well known. We don't need to introduce. I think everybody here knows Patricia. So welcome to all of you, and let us begin by saying a Hail Mary. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with you. Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God,
Holy Mary,
pray
Mother
for us sinners
of God,
now and at the hour of
pray
our
for
death.
us sinners.
Amen. Thank you. Over to you, Patricia.
So thank you, Dinesh, and good evening to all of you. I think today is the most appropriate day for our session on Mary. It's the first Saturday of the month, and first Saturdays are dedicated to Mary. We've also just begun the season of Advent, and without Mary, there would be no Advent and Christmas. And I think another connecting thread is Pope Francis's convocation of the Synod for a synodal church. And how can we leave out Mary, the mother of the church, in our journeying together in communion, participation, and mission? In fact, it surprises me that Mary is nowhere mentioned in the preparatory documents of the Synod, even though she is the one after Jesus who first initiated the journeying together in communion, participation, and mission with the disciples. And I think an added reason to turn to Mary today is because we are currently engulfed in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic with this new Omicron variant bringing once again fear, doubt, and uncertainty. Mary was not exempted from difficulties and temptations. Despite having no place to give birth to her son, escaping as a migrant and refugee, facing trials and misunderstandings, Mary's life was that of total faith and faithfulness right till the end. Before we begin engaging with the topic of today, I want to begin our session one of the oldest Marian prayers, the Sanctum Praesidium, which was composed in the 3rd century in Egypt. Precisely because this prayer expresses the faith of the early Christians in Mary's power of intercession, addressing her with the same word in Greek for to deliver, which we pray in the Our Father, addressing that to God.
Presidium confogimus, Sancta Dei Genitrix, nostras delegationes, menesticias in necessitatibus, sed a mediculis cultis, libera nos semper, Virgo benedicta. Presidium confogimus, Sancta Dei Genitrix, nostras delegationes, menesticias in necessitatibus.
I think you may have identified this prayer that we now pray at the end of the Rosary. And it's also a fitting prayer during this time of the pandemic. We fly to your protection, O Holy Mother of God. Now, I don't think that there is anyone here who doesn't already know something about Mary. And so right at the beginning, the questions that we need to ask are, what exactly do we know of Mary? What is it about Mary that has captured the imagination and emotions of people? And in what way has Mary really impacted our lives and the lives of people of all faiths? In fact, George Tawad has a book on the 1,000 faces of the Virgin Mary. And if you look at this uh, cover page of the December 2015 issue of the National Geographic magazine, it had the caption, "The most powerful woman in the world." And in fact, the cover story carried a picture of devotees of diverse faiths that gathered together to pray to Mary at Medjugorje, the site of one of the Marian apparitions. If you look at this picture, the story that is written in the National Geographic magazine by Maureen Orth was about how the Virgin Mary became the world's most powerful woman. And it notes that Mary barely speaks in the New Testament, but her image and legacy are found and celebrated around the world because of her powerful intercession. Now, while praying and seeking Mary's intercession is good, intercession without imitation of Mary's virtues and values is very limited. And so if we want to really discover the strong, committed Jewish woman of Nazareth, then we have to turn our gaze to the Bible, where, again, we have only 15 passages in the New Testament that refer to Mary, some not even by name. And this is, I think, because the main focus of the evangelists was Jesus and not Mary. Yet, even those 15 passages, if we truly read them, intensely, they reveal a lot about the prophetic, daring, and committed woman of Nazareth, which often gets camouflaged under the idealized, spiritualized depiction of Mary as a pious, obedient, and submissive woman. If you look at some of these frescoes, if we look at the Gospel of Luke itself, the evangelist Luke makes Mary an active participant in the mystery of the incarnation. And it's interesting that these early images of Mary are with the child. And so these early frescoes, which were found in the ancient catacombs of Rome, there is a constant reference to the mystery of the incarnation and the relationship between Christ and his mother, which I think is very important for understanding the Christian faith and the life at that time. The oldest and the most beautiful pictorial representation, as you see in these three pictures, and of course, which have really survived from the 2nd century in Roman Christianity, is the figure of the prophet pointing his finger. So you see over here the figure of the prophet pointing his finger towards Mary and the child, in this as well, in all these three. And here, of course, you have Mary praising. So these were found in the catacombs of Priscilla. And the prophet seems to be, at least the finger pointing, some say it's from Isaiah. "Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel." Whereas there are also some scholars who say it could be the prophet Balaam from the book of Numbers, pointing to this 8-rayed star over Mary's head, where we have in Numbers, "A star shall come forth out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel." So this is with regard to the first pictures, or the first, you can say, the frescoes in the catacombs of Priscilla. And after this, the next ones that were found were at the end of the 2nd century. So that was the beginning of the 2nd century, and this is at the end of the 2nd century, where you have the oldest surviving Orthodox icon of the Annunciation. And Later, it was also found in the crypt of the catacombs of Saints Peter and Marcellinus from the 3rd century. Now, these two frescoes have, again, a particular meaning and importance for the history of theology and the devotion to Mary, because in the Annunciation, Mary is the central character of the story, whereas in the Incarnation, of course, the focus shifts to Jesus. But here in the Annunciation, Mary is the main character. Now, if you go a little further to the 14th century, you see a different icon of the Annunciation. And interestingly, there is a similar image that we find in the 2nd century, as well as the one that we find here in the 14th century, with Mary seated in a high back chair and the Archangel Gabriel standing in a simple robe with bare feet, and his arm raised to signify that he's giving a message. Now, the main difference between the 2nd century image and this image is that here you see the Mother of God, her hair covered, okay, with this sort of a veil, whereas in the actual original older picture, the head of Mary is uncovered, keeping with the Christian beliefs that Mary at the time of the Annunciation was a young virgin. And in Rome, young virginal maidens would always have their heads uncovered. It's only with later iconography that the Mother of God was influenced by the veiling, which was, in the East. So that's one of the pictures, but more or less it's quite similar, the depiction. And of course, I think today you will find a number of different depictions of the Annunciation. So the Annunciation has really captured the attention of many artists and sculptors throughout history. But most of these pictures, you'll find the focus is on Mary's piety, on Mary's purity, and her submission in her encounter with the angel. But when we reflect on the Annunciation story, in reality, Mary's encounter with the divine was a very extraordinary one, because it happened in the midst of her ordinary everyday life. Now, the word for Annunciation, evangelismos, is really evangelization or good news. And I think this is something that we are talking today about, proclaiming the good news, evangelization. And angelic annunciations were not totally new in the Jewish tradition. So you have, for instance, in Genesis 17:16, you have the birth announcement of Isaac to Abraham. I will bless her, and moreover, I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Then again in Judges 13, we find the announcement of the birth of Samson to the wife of Manoah, who was barren. And the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, behold, you are barren and have no children, but you shall conceive and bear a son. And then you have, of course, in the same Gospel of Luke, in the first account, the angel appears to Zechariah, and he says, do not be afraid, Zechariah, for your prayer is heard, and your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you shall call his name John. In all the three cases, we can observe that the shame of barrenness is lifted with the announcement of a child. And in all three cases, they were blessed with the gift of a son. However, in the case of Mary, there is no extraordinary announcement of birth, in the sense that she was neither barren, nor was she praying for a child. She was already betrothed to Joseph. So on one side, we do have some, similarities with the pattern of the Annunciation stories, the three Annunciation stories, in the fact that there was the appearance of the angel, a certain, reaction of fear, and then you have the announcement of birth and the promise of blessing. But if you look at this story in Luke chapter 1, there is also a difference in this announcement of birth. we see in Mary's encounter with the angel, it's not just the announcement of birth, but there is a prophetic call, which we can also look at in relation to the call of Jeremiah, in Jeremiah 1-6, and also the call of Moses, where after they were, given that call, there is some resistance, there is a initial disbelief, a doubt, certain acknowledgement of unworthiness, you see. So the angel comes and approaches Mary and says, "Greetings, favored one." And of course, then she's perplexed and she ponders. Okay, so there are some similarities with the prophetic calls of Jeremiah and Moses. And then, of course, you have this sign of reassurance given. Also, that the task seems very impossible from one's human ability, but with God, all things are possible. And so I think Mary's annunciation can be looked at both in terms of these angelic annunciations, but they can also be looked at in relation to the prophetic calls or the calls given to the prophets, where God takes the initiative, but he also waits for the human response. Now, when we look at this story, it's a very beautiful dialogue between God's messenger and Mary before she actually gives her total consent. The fact that the angel addresses, Mary, "Greetings, favored one, the Lord is with you." In the original form, or in the original Greek, the greeting actually is not the usual form of peace, shalom, but actually it is rejoice, in keeping with the, Zephaniah 3:14. "Sing, daughter Zion, shout aloud, Israel, be glad and rejoice with all your heart, daughter Jerusalem." So you see that it's not the usual greeting, but it's a rejoicing. Rejoice because there is something that's going to come. And therefore, you see that the fact that Mary is addressed as favored one, as privileged one, she, I think, sensed that something was going to follow. And so Mary is perplexed and troubled. Now, we are not told why Mary was favored or why she was the privileged one. And so I think that's something that we could reflect on. So why was Mary favored? Why was she considered the privileged one? Here, in the gospel, we are not told anything about, how old Mary was. But when we look at the account in the proto-evangelium of James, we are told that Mary was about, 13 years of age. And so a young teenage girl, imagine a young teenage girl being, called favored one, privileged one. And, the Lord is with you. And I guess it must have been quite, um, difficult for Mary at that young age to understand fully what that meant. We also see a difference in the angel's response to Mary and to Zechariah. We just looked at Zechariah. So when the angel greets Zechariah, in verse 13, he says, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah, for your prayer has been heard." So they were already praying for a child, and now, their prayer has been heard. Whereas in the case of Mary, as I said, wasn't praying for a child. And so the angel says, "Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God." And then a beautiful word that we have here is, she was not just perplexed by his words, but she begins to ponder what sort of greeting this might be. I think this is a beautiful word, pondering, which today we look at in terms of discernment, reflection, pondering, contemplating. So Mary at that time was pondering, what sort of a greeting, what is going to follow. And we find this word also mentioned a couple of times, in the Gospel of Luke. Mary treasured these things in her heart. She pondered over them. And then, of course, what follows from this is that Mary does not say, give a response. After her pondering, Mary questions. Now, some say that this question, "How can this be since I am a virgin?" It could be a literary device. That means, the evangelist is simply using this question to continue the conversation, to have this dialogue between the angel and Mary. So the evangelist puts this question so that the conversation continues, and it focuses on the main message of the virginal conception through the intervention of the Holy Spirit. So this is, some scholars say that. But there's also the other side to it. When we read into these lines, it shows Mary's awareness of her situation, even at that tender young age. She was already betrothed to Joseph, and so it shows her fidelity to keep, that promise to Joseph, and also her ability to assert herself even at that young age. So pondering, questioning before, even giving a response. Then we have another beautiful thing. The angel says to her after she asks this question, there is, you see, not a direct response. The angel says, the Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. This overshadowing of God's presence is actually really, you can say, the culmination of Mary's faith in God. So it's so Mary was. It tells us, therefore, that Mary already before this lived a life in faith, because I told you in the Proto-Evangelium of James, it says that Mary was already, in the temple. Her parents had left her in the temple, and so she was already learning from the high priest in the temple, praying. She was aware of these things, and so you find that it's telling us now that Mary lived a very, maybe prayerful life, and the Holy Spirit was already present with Mary, but now it's going to overshadow Mary. If you go back to Exodus 40, we have that the cloud, the symbol of Yahweh covering with its shadow the tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant. So the Ark of the Covenant was most important for the people, for the Jews in that when they were taking that journey. And so they carried this Ark of the Covenant, and then you had the cloud which, covered, it overshadowed this covenant. And now Mary is the living tabernacle of the Lord. It's no more a wooden tabernacle that has to be carried, but overshadowed by the Spirit, Mary becomes totally receptive to God's active involvement in her life. And so she's filled with the Spirit, and she's given the grace to be able to say yes, to collaborate in that historic mission of Jesus, who came to bring fullness of life to all persons. So you see, like, it's a back and forth movement. And Mary's response is also a very beautiful response. Here am I, the servant of the Lord. Let it be with me according to your word. It's beautiful and yet problematic, because very often this servant of the Lord, gets misinterpreted. So it's as if to say, Mary was submissive, and, she had to be, and so women have to be, submissive and passive. And this is the passage that's often chosen for women and women religious, to be docile, submissive, obedient, But this is, I don't think, the real meaning of servant of the Lord or slave of the Lord. What does this mean? It means that Mary was chosen by God, and therefore it indicates the initiative and authority of God in human salvation, not passive subjection. Mary had the freedom to say no. Also, we find in Romans 1:1, St. Paul speaks of himself as a slave. So slave of the Lord is a title that can be applied to every believer, according to Beverly Gaventa. So all believers, and it includes us as well, are called to be slaves of the Lord. That means we are chosen, and we have the freedom to say yes at every moment, to do the will of God. Behold the handmaid of the Lord, let it be done to me according to your word. It also contains a post-resurrection proclamation of Christian faith. So Mary now is presented as the first to hear the gospel. So she becomes a model of perfect active faith, hearing the word and responding wholeheartedly to it. And this gets confirmed later on in the gospel when you have I think in chapter 8, verses 19 to 21, where the mother of Jesus and the others come and they say, and they tell Jesus, your mother and your brothers are waiting for you. And he says, who is my mother? Who are my brothers? My mother and my brothers are those who hear the word and do it. So you see the confirmation of what Mary has said right in the beginning. And you also have it confirmed first by Elizabeth. We look at that when we look at the visitation account in 145. Elizabeth says, blessed is she who believed that there would be a fulfillment of what was spoken to her by the Lord. So it's, so you have this confirmed first by Elizabeth and then, of course, by Jesus to his disciples. And so actually, Luke now is revealing three distinct yet interrelated roles of Mary as disciple, prophet, and mother. So we can also add another role to Mary, a theologian, because she ponders, questions, discerns before saying that final yes to give flesh to the Son of God. So the central meaning of the Annunciation story then is Mary's fiat, which was a courageous, daring consent in faith and total freedom to cooperate in God's salvific plan for humanity. Let me repeat this again because I think it's very important. The central meaning of this Annunciation story is Mary's fiat that yes, which was a courageous, daring consent in faith and total freedom to cooperate in God's salvific plan for humanity. So I like to look at it sometimes also with, with the C's. So you have the call, she's chosen. Then, of course, you have the consent, and then there is cooperation. And once she has given her consent and she cooperates, she is committed to the mission right till the very end. So faith and faithfulness, we find that, at every stage. So she cooperates right till the end, even after the death of Jesus, when she continues the mission. So we can truly say that Mary was a woman of faith who remained faithful to the mission till the end. And I want to take you now to Pope Francis's encyclical Lumen Fidei, which speaks about faith. Okay, Pope Francis acknowledges Mary as a woman of perfect faith and faithfulness. Blessed is she who believed. So you have the last verses of the encyclical in Lumen Fidei, which 58 to 60, which have these, beautiful things about the faith of Mary as well as the faithfulness. So she is the mother of the Lord, the perfect icon of faith. Again, confirming what Elizabeth already says, blessed is she who believed. And so in Mary, we have this daughter of Zion, fulfilling the long history of faith of the Old Testament. We had so many different faithful women, right from Sarah. And of course, there's no time to go through all of them. But it's very interesting that there are many faithful women, many of whom we have never heard of. And besides continuing this journey of faith or the history of faith, in Mary, we find faith demonstrating its fruitfulness, bearing fruit, the fruit of her womb. Okay. And so when our own spiritual lives bear fruit, Pope Francis says, we become filled with joy, which is the clearest sign of faith's grandeur. In her own life, Mary completed the pilgrimage of faith. So here you have faithfulness, faith and faithfulness, completing the pilgrimage of faith, following in the footsteps of her son. And so the faith journey of the Old Testament, which Mary continues and is then, taken up into the following of Christ, Mary offers us a clear sign of Christ's divine sonship. And so we find this receptivity of Christian faith in the lifelong courageous commitment of Mary. We also see motherhood and virginity coming together to show perfect faith and discipleship. I know many people find it very difficult, and especially women, to see how this motherhood and virginity can be put together. How can you be a mother and a virgin at the same time? But when we look at it from the biblical perspective, Israel was called virgin to show her faithfulness and complete dependence and reliance on Yahweh. And in the New Testament, again, we find virginity implying an orientation of the whole person to discipleship. And again, it gets, repeated by Paul in many passages where virginity is about the integrity of faith, the exclusive, adherence to the gospel, obedience to the will of God. And so even though Mary may have not fully understood the mission of Jesus, she remained open and trusting, pondering and treasuring things, but remaining faithful till the very end. Now we find this testimony of faith, as I told you, first in the testimony, we find this recognition of Mary's faith in the testimony of Elizabeth. So when you look at the story of the visitation, you find Elizabeth actually is the first one to recognize Mary's faith. And Elizabeth, although she was advanced in age and wisdom, she actually, knelt before the young Mary in humility, joy, and gratitude, proclaiming with a loud cry, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb." And this is the second half of the Hail Mary that we pray every day. So you see in this, the focus actually when Angel Gabriel actually addressed Zechariah and Mary, the focus was more on the future greatness. So what would happen in the future, to Mary and Elizabeth in terms of the birth of John and Jesus. But if you look at Elizabeth's proclamation here, it's a testimony of the inbreaking of the Spirit even in the present. So in this present moment of their meeting, they experience the inbreaking of the Spirit. And then she says, "Why has this happened to me, that the mother of my Lord," the first time again that somebody uses this word, the mother of my Lord. How does it happen that the mother of my Lord comes to me, to visit me? So you see a beautiful, meeting of these two women, but they are able to proclaim or to recognize the inbreaking of the Spirit in the present moment, not something for the future, but right in their meeting, they have already understood or experienced this inbreaking of the Spirit. And we also find in the account of the visitation of Mary to Elizabeth, a woman attentive to the promptings of the Spirit. So you find already before that, you see the minute Mary is told that Elizabeth, your cousin, is already also with child and she's in the 6th month, there is a certain urgency that takes Mary to Elizabeth out of concern and sensitivity, knowing that Elizabeth is already advanced in age. And so without becoming preoccupied with her own condition, she hastens to assist her cousin Elizabeth. So she's therefore very much attentive to the prompting of the Spirit, but she's also attentive to the needs of others, to the need of this woman. For those of you who are, married, you will understand that the first 3 months or the first trimester and the last trimester are the most crucial in one's pregnancy. And so here you have Elizabeth in the last trimester, an older woman. And here you have Mary in the first trimester. Usually people never reveal that they are pregnant in the first trimester. And so, Mary is, she goes with haste to meet Elizabeth, to be there by her side, to be of service to her. And she put her trust fully in God, taking that risk to go beyond the comfort of her home, to travel from Nazareth to the hill country of Judea, which is about 130 maybe kilometers. She realizes that Elizabeth is old and she's in a much more vulnerable condition than herself. And so she stays with her for 3 months helping her with all the different chores, sharing experiences. I suppose they would have also been watching their bodies grow and change. And I like to look at, Mary and Elizabeth as pregnant with life. We're talking about faith and faithfulness for fullness of life. In this experience, you find Mary and Elizabeth pregnant with life. And I am sure they would have acknowledged God's salvific plan in their lives, celebrating their sisterhood and solidarity in that loving embrace. It's a beautiful picture, of these two women, embracing each other, and they recognize the prophetic mission with great joy. And I think the first thing that they do is proclaim the good news to each other before they proclaim it to others. So the first moment or the first encounter between the two of them is a proclamation of the good news, a sharing in this prophetic mission. And I think both had something to offer each other. Elizabeth with her wisdom, maturity, experience, and she was also a God-fearing woman, the wife of a priest. And Mary, youthful, enthusiastic, ready to help. What did they experience? A prophetic companionship. So I like to look at, Mary's call as a prophetic call, Elizabeth's call as well as a prophetic call, and now they share in this prophetic companionship. Along with the uncertainties and the insecurities of the call, both women received God's reassurance and that comforting presence, which I'm sure enabled them to respond wholeheartedly to the inspiration of the Spirit. But at the same time, what is very beautiful is times we only think of the vertical dimension. Me and my Lord, I can spend hours in prayer. But what about my relationship with others? And so here you see in this meeting, both of them sense the need for that human encounter of physical presence, of bonding, of support, engaging in the spiritual conversation, sharing the experience of joy, pain, hope, apprehension. And so there's also shared wisdom in their meeting. So it's really a prophetic, meeting, a prophetic companionship, but where we find shared wisdom. And so Mary and Elizabeth are challenged to go beyond their ordinary existence, to undertake a journey in faith, not knowing where it would eventually lead. The focus of Mary and Elizabeth is also not just on themselves, even though we find this beautiful meeting and this encounter. The focus starts with the two of them, but I think it is even in that, that encounter, it is on their relationship with each other for mission, the involvement in God's salvific mission. And that is why in their encounter, even the babes in their wombs were awakened to their identity and mission. And so that is why Elizabeth could say, the child in my womb also leaped for joy. So the joy that the two experience is also experienced by the babes in their wombs. And so you find, Mary and Elizabeth sharing this journey of faith. And the song that Mary sings in response to Elizabeth's greeting is the Magnificat, Mary's song of praise, the song that Hannah had already sung, when the stigma of barrenness was removed from her. In 1 Samuel, we had that song of Hannah. And Mary sings this song, when she's responding to Elizabeth's greeting, in gratitude for what the Lord is going to do in her and through her for all humanity. But there is a difference in Mary's song and Hannah's song. Because Hannah's song is more about, thanking God for removing the stigma of barrenness in now giving her, the child. Whereas Mary actually is thanking God for all that, God is going to do in and through her. So there's a shift from self to all humanity. And in this Magnificat, Luke actually makes Mary the spokesperson to announce the good news of salvation. And so we find that Mary's hymn, or this canticle, is more than a joyful hymn of praise. It brings out a yearning for justice and liberation. By putting the hymn on the lips of Mary, Luke shows Mary as heralding and proclaiming the liberating message of Jesus even before he is born, and before he can actually proclaim it in his mission statement in Luke 4, where you have the Spirit of the Lord is upon me to proclaim good news to the poor and all that. So Mary is already now proclaiming this good news of liberation, of salvation, right in the beginning. So initiating already the mission of Jesus. And it also connects with the Beatitudes that Jesus will be proclaiming later on in the Gospel of Luke, in Luke 6. So you have the blessed, or the Makarios, and you have the woes, the blessings and the woes. And so in the Magnificat, we also find, both the blessings and the woes. So he's going to now, show his strength to those who are lowly, and scatter the proud. He brings down the powerful, he raises up the lowly. And so we find a new paradigm announcing God's preferential option for the poor and challenging the proud and the powerful. The values of the world are being subverted for the values of God's kingdom in the person of Mary. In solidarity with Mary, with the poor and the powerless, Mary is able to proclaim a threefold revolution of justice and liberation. So we find a socio-cultural revolution in which the proud will be scattered, the lowly are going to be raised. There is a political revolution in which the powerful will be brought down. And you have an economic revolution in which the hungry will be filled with good things and the rich sent away empty. And so again, you find Mary's prophetic role seen very clearly over here, where she's able to interpret the good news that Jesus will proclaim later on. And Mary not just, proclaims this good news through her words, she actually lives it out, in her commitment right till the cross. And even beyond the cross, when she's actively engaged in both contemplation and action to make the reign of God present in and through her life. And so I want to now shift from Luke to the sequel of Luke in Acts, where you really find this faithfulness seen in the account of Mary with the disciples in Acts 1:14. So Mary is here with the disciples and with the other women praying for the Spirit. So we find her strong, supportive presence of courage, strength, and unity, with these disciples, assuring them, praying with them. There's much more that I can talk about, with these different passages. But I think I want to now shift to what does this mean for us? What does Mary's life of faith and faithfulness imply for each one of us today? So there are many passages, you can also go to John's Gospel at Cana and of course at the cross. But I think this is enough for us to at least situate, Mary's faith and faithfulness. And now to invite us to reflect on what does it imply for us today? So if we look at Mary's faith in God, which enabled her to say her fiat in total freedom, then we can look at how Mary was focused on the mission, working not in isolation, but participating faithfully in communion with her Son and with men and women disciples, journeying together in friendship to enable fullness of life for all people. So Mary thus becomes our model of faith and faithfulness for fullness of life. Okay, so you see, as I told you, you can also look at it in the form of those C's. So you have the fiat, the consent. Before that, you already had the call, and she's chosen. And then you have her cooperation, her commitment, and the continuation of the mission, right till the end with the disciples in that upper room in Jerusalem. I now want to focus or take you to Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis's encyclical, in which he actually refers to this, to the universal motherhood of Mary, and how we are called to imitate her. So just as Mary, journeyed with Jesus, with the disciples, right through and even after Jesus's death, Pope Francis speaks of, he has very few actually remarks about Mary in this encyclical. I think just about 277 and 278. But it says a lot about, what we are called to do today. So the church is a home with open doors because she is a mother. And in imitation of Mary, the mother of Jesus, we want to be a church that serves, that leaves home and goes forth from its places of worship, goes forth from its sacristies in order to accompany life, to sustain hope, to be the sign of unity, to build bridges, to break down walls, to sow seeds of reconciliation. So very clearly, Pope Francis is speaking about the mission that we have today as church in imitation of how Mary lived her life of faith and faithfulness. So in imitation of Mary, this is what we are called to journey. For many Christians, the journey of fraternity also has a mother whose name is Mary. Having received this universal motherhood at the foot of the cross, Mary cares not only for Jesus, but for the rest of her children. In the power of the risen Lord, she wants to give birth to a new world where all of us are brothers and sisters, where there is room for all those whom our societies discard, where justice and peace are resplendent. So very clearly, it takes us back to this account where Mary sings that Magnificat, so where, justice will prevail, where the powerful will be brought down, and, where we can share this mission with everyone, across borders, with people of different faiths, with people of different cultures, castes, class, creeds. And finally, I think when we situate all of this in today's context of the synod and synodality, we can look at Mary very much as part of this synodal journey, part of our journey for a synodal church. Mary was in communion with God and with others. She participated fully in the mission of Jesus and the church. And with the disciples in that upper room, she was filled with the Holy Spirit and went forth journeying together in the power of the Spirit to continue proclaiming the gospel to all. So we can see in Mary this ultimate meaning of redemption for us and for the church. As graced beings, therefore, we are invited to live, move, and have our being in God, taking Mary as our model of faith and faithfulness. I want to invite you now to just pause for a few minutes and just reflect on anything that struck you during this time, with whatever I shared about Mary's faith and faithfulness. But you can also reflect on it in the context of your own life, in the context of the pandemic, in the context of this synod for a synodal church. Anything, let us just pause for 5 minutes and reflect on anything that has struck us, anything that has touched us, any questions, anything that it has stirred deep within. And before we go to sharing, anything that struck us or any comments or questions, I invite you to pray together this prayer which we find at the end of the encyclical by Pope Francis, the prayer to Mary, Mother of the Church and Mother of our faith. You can pray it wherever you are, muted or unmuted. Mother, help our faith. Open our ears to hear God's word and to recognize his voice and call. Awaken in us a desire to follow in his footsteps, to go forth from our own land and to receive his promise. Help us to be touched by his love, that we may touch him in faith. Help us to entrust ourselves fully to him and to believe in his love, especially at times of trial, beneath the shadow of the cross, when our faith is called to mature. Sow in our faith the joy of the risen one. Remind us that those who believe are never alone. Teach us to see all things with the eyes of Jesus, that he may be light for our path, and may this light of faith always increase in us until the dawn of that undying day, which is Christ himself, your Son, our Lord. Amen.
So thank you, Patricia, for this very, very beautiful prayer-filled reflection on Mary. What struck me right at the beginning was what you said, that many of us have a piety, a pious devotion to Mary, but we are also called to follow her, to imitate her, to become like her. So without further ado, let us all bring our questions, our sharings, our insights.
Yes, so I would invite you first, if anyone, to just share anything that struck you before we go into questions. So that's why I have finished a little early. So just share, feel free to share anything that struck you, anything that disturbed you, anything that, that maybe, that surprised you, anything, just reactions, some comments before you ask questions.
May I?
Sure.
I loved your interpretation of the visitation, where you, I love the whole thing, but in particular this thing where you spoke about what they celebrated, and I mean, you gave it so much life. And when you spoke about the celebrating of sisterhood and the celebrating of that whole faith journey, and probably all the assurance of God as well as what they were going through as part of, yes, both of them, sharing the wisdom, sharing the journey of faith that they had. Thanks for that, because that's a new insight for me.
Thank you, Reena. Anyone else? Because just feel free. There are no right or wrong answers. And I think since we want to have more of interaction, even if you have to say a word, just, or maybe if you don't feel like saying, put it in the chat, just put a word or a comment, and I'm sure Dinesh will read it out for you.
Sister Patricia.
Yes.
Yeah, I liked your presentation very much. Especially, I was very much taken up with the three C's that you were spoken: the call and the cooperation. It meant so much for me that I was really taken up by those three C's. And also your reflection on the Annunciation, which was very good. And certain aspects were certain new things for me, like faith and faithfulness, the connection. It was really very inspiring, and thank you very much for all that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Let me share. One of the things that really struck me was of Mary pondering. And in this very fast paced world, I don't know whether we have time to ponder. And through her pondering, I think, I don't know which one of the fathers of the church said that Mary conceived Jesus in her heart before conceiving him in her body. And I think this is so true for us also, because it's when we ponder that we allow the seeds of contemplation, as Thomas Merton would say, fall into our lives. And we can allow them to kind of take fruit, take flesh, and be born in our lives. So pondering.
Yeah, very
Thank you for
true.
that.
Yeah. In fact, you even have Charles Dickens, who has written a whole, essay simply on this pondering, on Mary's pondering. It's very beautiful, when we just look at Mary's pondering. And I think when we speak about pondering, we can look at, so this today when we're talking about, prayer, even this whole synodal journey, this listening, pondering, is inviting us to listen to the Spirit, listen to the voices of others. And so you find this, a constant movement, or you can say a process of listening, discerning, contemplating, acting, orthodoxy and orthopraxis, so you find and that's what theology is all about. It's not just it's a reflection on who God is, and of course then we live that out in our lives, and then again we reflect on it, and it deepens our our understanding of God. It deepens our intimacy with God and the way we live our lives. So we this ongoing process. And so the more we engage in this process of listening, discerning, pondering, acting, and then we go again into listening, pondering, discerning, acting.
And in this short space of time, you brought about the proactivity of Mary and her strength in just the few incidents that you touched. And that is something that, where you say that she's the one who proclaimed, Luke puts it in her mouth, in the Magnificat, where she's proclaiming the good news before Jesus announces his mission. And so her yes preceded his, kind of a thing. So the need for women to realize, and for the church to make space for women, because they have an important part to play. And when you speak of Fratelli Tutti and I think that dimension of concern and sensitivity is something that women bring.
Yes.
Inshallah, the church makes spaces for us, allows us.
Yes. Thank you, Reena. It's beginning at a slow pace, but I hope, I think it will pick up as more and more women start also taking an active role. So we also need to, take this active role. And I think the church has started giving, at least Pope Francis is giving women opportunities, spaces, creating spaces. And so we need to also cooperate, take that
Yeah.
initiative, to move forward.
There's a message in the chat, Dinesh.
Yeah. So there's a message by Sylvia. So, hi, Sister Patricia. Thank you for your very inspiring talk. I liked your reflection on Annunciation, Mary's faithfulness to God, passion to do God's will, reaching out to other persons, person-oriented, etc.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, so that's for comments. Anyone has any questions, anything that is not clear, or even anything else that you would like to ask? I try to keep the focus on Mary's faith and faithfulness, so I have not taken too many passages. I thought it's good just to focus on this. But if you look at the Gospel of John, again, it's a very beautiful account where you have the same thing of Mary initiating Jesus's ministry at Cana, and then of course you have, the final culmination when Mary was at the foot of the cross, where Jesus entrusts, John to Mary, Mary to John, to continue the mission. And then we see it, of course, being continued. So there are many other passages where you find this faith and faithfulness also.
Yes, so it'll be really good if we kind of start sharing a little bit of what the questions we have. I remember Cedric Rebello, a Bombay Jesuit, who spoke about Mary as the rebel, the one who really challenged things and challenged them from a sense of her own power, a sense of her own call. And maybe that is something that we need to really own once again.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dinesh. And I think this whole thing of daring to question, daring, I think as a church community, one of the things is we've got so used to sitting back and listening and, absorbing and simply, taking in like the sponge, but we do not really, dare to question, to challenge, to ask. And I think that's something that as church we need to also take very seriously, because faith is also, this seeking, questioning, asking. So it's not just accepting, it's not just a passive acquiescence, but we need to ask questions, we need to search. Only then we will find. Seek and you will find. So unless we seek, unless we dare to ask, we will not find.
Could you expand on the triple revolution? I mean, I had heard of it a long time ago, Tissa Balasuriya's.
Yeah.
Could you expand on that a bit?
So Tissa Balasuriya is speaking about this, and actually some say about a fourth revolution as well, because this threefold revolution is really, if you see, the economic revolution, speaking about how the hungry will be filled. Of course, when you look at our world today, I don't think we can say that it is really taking place in the sense of the material, way of understanding, being filled, the hungry being filled. But when I look at it, for instance, in this time of the pandemic, I think we can really look at how many people went out of their way, simple people went out of their way to share with others. So feeding it became a very significant, gesture of evangelization. Feeding, the hungry, feeding the sick, reaching out, doctors, nurses, but even other people who went, people of all faiths. I saw so many Muslim people who were at the forefront, distributing food packets, rations, being there. Recently, I think we've read about that sister Gina who got that award because she not only was feeding, but she kept in close contact with the migrants. She took their phone numbers and she would keep, keep in touch with them even after they had crossed the border. To check whether they had reached safely, to check, whether they needed things. And so this part of so the economic revolution is, I think, one in terms of the material revolution, but also in terms of a spiritual revolution, the poor, who will be fed. And I think here is where we're talking about this whole synodal journey in which we are, so the being, able to share the good news with each other, to fill people with this good news. So when we are embarking on this journey, how can we really, proclaim this good news to all, to people of all different faiths? But first, starting with our own, within the church, the communion of churches. How do we break the word, break bread together? And so that's one of the things. That's the economic revolution, the socio-cultural revolution. You see, again, what's happening today with the barriers, caste, class, and so they're talking about how the proud will be brought down, and the lowly shall be raised. And who are the lowly? The poor and the lowly. We need to identify the poor and lowly. The poor and lowly are not just those who are, again, materially poor, but so many others who are lowly. For instance, the LGBTQ community, okay, or you can say women, children, migrants, refugees. So all these different people will form the poor and the lowly. And so how can we also take the good news? In fact, besides this synodal journey, the Pope has begun many other journeys. And one of the journeys is, on what is that? Theology, for those on the margins.
The marginalized.
Yeah. So basically, actually engaging in another synodal journey to listen to the voices of those at the margins, to see if actually whatever is being shared, if they are also part of that journey, if they are able to receive, the good news, if they are able to understand what is being proclaimed. So that aspect is very strong as well, to look at these different groups that are marginalized and to include them. So you have the socio-cultural, economic, and of course the political group. And I think the clear example of this political revolution is what we are seeing today in this synodal journey, breaking the hierarchy between, the leaders, the church, the leaders and the faithful. How do we engage together, as one community, as one church? And so that is something, again, where we need to break borders and to engage with each other.
Not yet doing the breaking
with
the hierarchy, but Francis is here, so let's hope at some stage.
So I see two comments.
So there are a couple of comments which came in on YouTube, and I've put them over here. So the first one by Bryneth Lawrence. The revolutionary role of Mary often goes unnoticed, while Mary is portrayed as very humble. You did clarify this really well. And the second by Maria Rommel. We are three sisters and all three went through pregnancy and can fully understand Mary's concern for her elder sister.
Yeah, how nice. Yeah, it's so true. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Can I,
Yes, sure.
since Reina has pointed out that time along the way, the wayfarer, I just want to take this image of Mary as a pilgrim, but Mary also as a sign of contradiction. The woman, the Mata, kind of in religious traditions has a lot of different connotations. Let's take the Mata. Let's say in the popular Hindu tradition, it is the Shakti. It is the power of the Matas. Then in Islam, Miriam is highly regarded. There's a whole chapter, in the Quran, which praises Miriam as the one who gave birth, to Jesus, to the power of Allah, to the power of the Spirit, or whatever. And then you have a very traditional group of Catholics who have very strong devotion to Mary, but I don't think very much the normal teenager who had problems, who had a lot of difficulties, but more the Velankani kind of image of Mary as the very powerful person. And then you have a group of different Protestant groups who just discount Mary as not being extremely important. So we have different groups all along the spectrum who look at Mary in different ways. And how does Mary kind of become a pilgrim, somebody who can journey with us, along this synodal way? Because she went through ups and downs. Most of it were downs in the sense that they were very difficult decisions that she had to take along with Joseph, I guess, up to the end of Jesus's life, up, to the Pentecost. So how do you see this paradigm of Mary, or this image of Mary as a pilgrim?
Is that a question?
Yeah, if you can just, that's a comment, but I like the image of Mary as a pilgrim, but also as a sign of contradiction, because
because I took from even Pope Francis's document, the encyclical in Lumen Fide, where he speaks about Mary's pilgrimage of faith. So it's an entire journey right from the beginning. So Mary as a pilgrim, you see it, and I spoke about it already in the beginning, this whole journey that Mary undertook, when she said that yes. So right from the time she said her fiat, it was already the starting of this pilgrimage of faith, so the journey of faith that she embarked upon. And again, I want to repeat, it was not an isolated journey in the sense that just she, but with others. So journeying together in this pilgrimage of faith with Jesus, with the disciples, with all the other people. And today she continues, I think, journeying with us in this synodal process, so that is why I was saying I was surprised that Mary is not mentioned in the preparatory document, but she's very much part of the synodal process, journeying with us as mother, as model. And also what you said about the second thing, that she's also a sign of contradiction, but that is what was already prophesied at the beginning, when Anna, so you find that prophetic, message from Anna saying that, that she will be a sign, that both Mary and Jesus were going to be signs of contradiction, and that she would have to pay the price of it. And I think that's another thing, that if we look at, Mary from that angle, then we have to be ready to face persecution. We have to be ready to face, suffering and difficulties. The fact that that everything is going smoothly only shows that we are not really taking, this journey of faith, in the sense that we are not really fully involved, participating in it in the way that we should be, with that commitment, daring, to move forward. And also, since you spoke about Velankini and the apparitions, another point that I want to talk about is, I showed you that image of on the National Geographic magazine about, and it till today, like, people are flocking to the sites of apparition. But what we have forgotten is, it's good, to visit these places, so devotion is good. But the apparitions of Mary actually are not just, they are also very prophetic messages that are given, not just for prayer. So we only look at it as prayer, but it's for unity. So conversion, to start something new. And also, if we look at, Reena, you asked the question about those revolutions. That's what we actually see very much in the apparitions. But you see what's happened. The sites of the apparition, when we look at it, who did Mary appear to? To the poor, to the lowly, young, children. But and so they were the ones who actually brought in, were able to share those prophetic messages of Mary to others. But today, what do you see? Who is controlling those sites of apparition? Again, it's the hierarchy.
Power. Yeah.
So you see a reversal over here of power. So where actually those apparition sites were, Mary appeared to the poor, to the lowly, to simple people, to, in real remote godforsaken areas. But today they have become very commercialized, places of tourist places, and controlled again by, look at all the apparition sites and who is in charge. So I think that's something again we can reflect upon, so that power from the poor and lowly has been simply taken again by the powerful. And so we have erected, big places which are controlled by, again, powerful people. So we need to look at the reversal.
Interesting.
Does anyone want to add anything also? Feel free. You don't only have to ask questions. If you want to add something like how Francis just did, please feel free. That's shared wisdom. So we can already begin to have shared wisdom even over here.
So just unmute and speak.
Yeah.
Okay, so while people are putting up the courage to unmute and speak, let me say something. One of the things in the Buddhist tradition is they say that if you meet the Buddha, kill him, because you're supposed to discover the Buddha within you. In our tradition, when we think of Christ, when we think of Mary, we think about worshipping. We don't say kill them. We don't say discover them within. But I think this is something tremendously powerful for us also. Not just to worship Mary, but like Patricia said at the beginning, to become a Mary today. Become that powerful presence who can nurture the Christ. Something that's keeping on coming back to me again and again. So, okay then. We still have about 10 minutes. So if there are questions or comments.
Actually, like Francis's thing about the Pilgrim Mary. I would like to think about it a little bit more, the journeying, the accompanying, and it fits in with the synodal, the listening, the reflecting together, discerning as we move ahead.
Yeah, Francis,
Yes.
that's something.
There's also, I don't know whether you mentioned it, for a part, I had went out for a short while, Patricia, I must say that. the whole question of the Didi, the elder sister, I think in India, at least I have two sisters, they're very close to each other. They love each other very much, and they're all the time consulting between the two of them. I don't know how many of you have sisters, but they find the elder sister as a source of more than the mother. Mother tends at times, to be, okay, I know everything, I will take care of you, that kind of thing. But, who are the same level. So can Mary be seen as a Didi? I'm talking about, can she be seen as an elder sister who understands at that level and not somebody who has, at the deity level? I don't know. It might sound a little strange, but whether all of us can see in Mary a kind of an elder sister who understands us, not necessarily a mother. I don't know.
Dinesh, can I add something?
Sure.
Hello, can you hear me, Dinesh?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, Sister Patricia, I'm sure you might have given a wonderful talk. Sorry I couldn't attend. I had mass, so just finished mass and I logged in. But I'm sure you might have shared. But I would still like to repeat it. We as priests, many times we fail to, project the right image of Mary from the pulpit. Of course, right image. When I say, we do preach about obedient Mary, submissive Mary, or surrendering aspect of Mary, but we fail to preach that courageous woman, questioning woman, somebody who is challenging, somebody who is very firm, somebody who's trying to bring revolution. We somehow fail to, bring that aspect of Mary very powerfully in our homilies from the pulpit. All that we speak about is her faith, about is her obedience. And I think we as priests and religious, we need to give that right image of Mary to people. Of course, the other image is also right, but only one side. The other side also needs to be proclaimed that effectively to our people. And I think that will make a great change. Yeah.
Eunice, you said the other image of submission is right?
No, I'm saying submissive to the will of God, to the will of God. In that aspect, not submissive to Joseph or to the society, submissive to the will of God.
Can I ask you a question? And Eunice, would
Yeah,
you be able to reflect on why do priests project the image of the humble, the sweet, the thing, and fail to?
Quite convenient for us, no? Quite convenient for us to answer a lot of other things as well, no? So we have to
And retain power?
that. Yeah, of course, that power play is there in that. The whole power play is there, where we consider Mary as mother, as friend. Of course, that accompanying image is also very important, but there are others also who accompany us. Joseph also accompanies us, but at the same time, who questions, who challenges. That image has to be, she questioned angel, how would it be possible? So she was able to speak to Jesus. She was able to speak to the servants at Cana. So she was there. She was there after the resurrection. She was with the disciples. She was not there who was taking support from disciples. Rather, she was giving that strength to disciples. Disciples had already ran away from Jesus when he was dying on the cross. And she was there at the foot of the cross. So she was not there who was taking comfort and consolation from the disciples. Rather, she was there, the very strong woman, giving that strength and that courage to his disciples, that hope to his disciples. Somewhere we fail to see that image, and somewhere we fail to preach that image as well. So that image needs to be, that we fail, that we as leaders or so-called leaders, we fail. So,
nice to hear from a priest, and I hope you challenge other priests.
I do speak in the homily. If there are people who have heard my Marian homilies, I do speak about the same things.
Thanks, Linus, for that point. And I think if we connect it with what Francis was saying about, looking at Mary as a sister, if you look at in tradition, if you look at the volumes that have been written on Mary, in tradition, you will, and if you read all those volumes, you find this very, pious view of Mary, or even Mary idealized, Mary put at the level of goddess, and at the same time, so those who were actually looking to Mary as a goddess were the very ones who looked at, who connected women with sinful Eve. So you
Mm.
see, so there was this disconnect, So on one side, all that they saw in Mary, all their emotions, you can say, were directed towards Mary. But Mary was disconnected with the rest of women, because Mary, the rest of the women were looked at in relation to sinful Eve, and so women were looked at. That's why, as sinful, as being cursed, and so all these things, and so therefore you see that disconnect. And today I think we are moving to look at how actually, Mary was. First a woman like anyone else, so not. And I think it's very important for us therefore to turn to Vatican II, because Vatican II really brings about this balance where
Yeah.
Mary is looked at in relation to Christ and in relation to the church. So she is, there's a balance you see of Mary in relation to Christ and the church. So it's a beautiful way of getting back to this looking at Mary. And so therefore when Francis was talking about looking at Mary as a sister, because once we bring Mary down from the pedestal,
Yeah.
so sometimes it's easy also to idealize our mothers, but also to treat sometimes our wives and others as in a very. So I don't know whether again for married people they will be able to reflect on this point. Sometimes a young man can have a very good relationship with his mother because his mother is everything, but with his own wife, it's she's persecuted, she suffers, she's a victim, whatever. And so you find again this relationship. So it's not only between mother-in-laws and daughter-in-law, but also the son with the mother and with his own wife. So you see that relationship. And so the more we start looking at Mary as also maybe a sister, a friend, one among us, in the communion of saints, our whole understanding also towards other women will also change.
Thanks for that. We have about 3 minutes more. So if no one's saying anything, I'm going to jump in again and say something. Patricia, I really totally resonate with what you were saying about how our relationship with women is either goddesses or prostitutes, and we don't know how to handle that in between area, and we need to really get comfortable with that, because I think we reflect what is there in wider society, and we need to really grow into that. Part of that, I think, is the whole process of growing up, of becoming adult. Very often we remain so infantile in our relationship to God, we remain infantile in our relationship to one another.
Very true.
It's a challenge for us.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Dinesh. That's yeah. Any last comments? Any last? Because we have 2 minutes, so anyone wants to just say or add something? I know that I'm reading the things. There are quite a few things posted in the chat, and so I'm reading that, and I think the others can read it as well. I want to read what Shirley has written, because I think she says it's interesting and noteworthy to imitate the Annunciation scene where we see God choosing Mary and yet waiting for her consent. Mary, who symbolizes a triple marginalized, a woman, a teen, and unmarried woman, who is asked to bear a child. It shows the need for consent, respect, and human dignity of the marginalized. Yes, thank you very much. Yeah. And I think more and more we need to start paying attention to how we can engage with those at the margins, So just as I told you, doing theology from the existential peripheries, also engaging in this whole synodal journey, we need to find ways in which we can include the excluded, those who are on the margins in this journey. Otherwise, we are sometimes in a very intellectual, journey in which others feel excluded, those maybe who do not connect with us on that level. So how do we listen? How do we share, break the word to also those who are on the margins.
Thanks, Patricia. It's been a very interesting evening.
Thank you, Reina.
Thank you. And we've come to our time, 7:30 now. Perhaps once again, as we started off, we can ask Mary to be with us on the way, taking with you from what Francis said about Mary as a pilgrim, this whole journey of synodality, asking her to journey with us as what do we call it? Synodality, co-journeyers along the way. Let us perhaps pause for a moment in gratitude, asking that we too become contemplative, ponderers, that we become revolutionaries like Mary, that we become companions on the journey, as Mary was with Elizabeth and with the early church. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you to all of you. And thanks, Dinesh, for seeing to everything. And,
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you to everyone.
Thanks.
Okay.
It was good to hear you, Patricia.
Thank you. Thank you for being there.